All
Me,
right.
hey,
Yeah, we can do this now. And this is going to be another interesting interview because we're dealing with some information from, I think, the 1960s. Is this 1960s, Donald?
1950.
50s. We go back to 1950s. Okay, well, you tell us your name because I can't pronounce your last name.
Sure enough. It's Donald. That's pretty simple.
Mhm.
Rokkan.
Rokkan,
Rokkan. Rokkan.
Donald
And
Rokkan. And Donald, yeah, he reached out to me after I did an interview with Dr. Stephen Greer. He heard the interview. Of course, Stephen Greer is very famous for the Disclosure Project, and I helped him with that, because
yeah.
when he came to Italy, I got him all the military guys that were willing to talk. So then you reached out to me mainly about, well, you're in Tennessee right now, right, Donald? Is that where you are?
Yes, but I spent most of my life in Washington State.
Okay, Washington State, which is very important. Um, so anyway, you're telling me about your dad. What was his name and his full rank for what he did?
Bill, not William, Bill Rokkan.
Yeah, and
And,
what was his
and
position?
in the Navy, well, there's an interesting story about that too, but if it doesn't fit in, I can just skip it. It's how my dad became fascinated with flying and became a pilot.
Very important. Yes, go ahead.
So, well, I'll get to the Navy part, but let me say my dad was born in 1922 in the Great Depression. In 1927, at the age of 5, the community was notified there was going to be a special event. And what it was a biplane flying at a low altitude over Kennewick, Washington, my dad's hometown, even though he was born in Pasco, because that's where they had the only hospital at the time. So this biplane came flying over. My dad's 5 years old, and he became permanently fascinated with flying and wanting to fly. And so as he got older, he worked a lot of odd jobs, delivering newspapers, mowing lawns, you name it, saved up money and paid for flying lessons. And at the age of 16, he earned his pilot's license. And so from then until the age of 19, in 1942, he was a crop duster in that region, which is very agricultural in its leanings, lots of wheat farms and so on. But when the war started, in what was it, December 7th, 1941 is when Pearl Harbor was attacked by Japan. In 1942, when officially the US had joined in with World War II with the other allies, he went to the Sandpoint Naval Air Station just north of Seattle and signed up to join the Navy. And as he was being checked through, eventually somebody asked him, do you have any skills we should know about? And he said, well, I'm a licensed pilot. What? So just like that, they made him an ensign at the age of 19 and sent him to the Pensacola Naval Air Station to go through the formal naval aviation training. And upon graduation, not all of them made it, by the way, lots were washed out. He was assigned to flying transport planes instead of fighter pilots, which I'm fortunate because I wouldn't be here probably if he had been selected to fly fighter pilots. So 1942 to 46, that was the tenure of his in the Navy. So he eventually, I know, became, because you asked the other day to show a photo.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, there's my pop and my mom, their wedding photo, October 20th, 19.
A little bit, bring it up there. Oh, yeah.
Okay, yeah, anyway. So at that time, he was a lieutenant, junior grade. And whether he became a full grade lieutenant by the time he left the Navy, I don't know. So they decided, my folks, to return to Kennewick and Pasco, those two cities, because my mom grew up in Pasco, and they wanted to start a family there, and that's a long story too. But my dad, by the way, was offered a job which he turned down in favor of going to Hanford, the Hanford nuclear site.
Yeah.
It was at the time kind of a nondescript company named United Airlines. So he could have been a pilot for United, but because their family was back in Washington and all of that, and he had a job offer that was the same salary as United offered him, they chose to go back to their homes, their home cities. And then that's where I was born in late 49, and my brother in 48. So one of his first jobs at the Atomic Energy Commission, the AEC Hanford site, was to be a surveillance pilot to fly over the Hanford site to ensure that there weren't any intruders, either by foot, vehicle, or airplane, because it was a forbidden site, but also the airspace above it was forbidden. So that's what my dad did for a number of years, and then he went into the security division and did really well there. But so that's the lead up to what happened in 1950. The month was September, and I was still soiling my diapers. At that time, I was just 9 months old, if that. And my pop, who was really the best pilot among the group of surveillance pilots, my dad was an outstanding pilot. He had nearly 9,000 hours of flight time. The Air Force used to be the Army Air Force.
Right.
There's a, well, it was closed down, I think in '66. There was an Air Force base in a city, outside of a city called Moses Lake, Washington, about 35 miles straight, a little northeast of the Hanford site. And the Hanford site was 876 square miles at one point, right there on the Columbia River. Massive, the biggest of all.
Was it near Mount Rainier at all? Where,
what's that?
Was it near Mount Rainier at all, where Kenneth Arnold had his sighting?
Well, no, but there are lots of sightings in that area in general, particularly around Yakima, Washington, where there's a military exercise area. But so that Air Force base in Moses Lake, they offered the AEC a 4-engine prop plane that they were going to get rid of. And so somehow it was flowing down to the Richland Airport, which the AEC operated at the time. And my dad then, and this was a bright, sunny, clear day, September 1950. I don't have the date of that month. He took off in the plane to test fly it. By the way, he judged it as a piece of junk, and the Air Force took it back. I have no idea whatever happened to it. But so how, by the way, this is important, how I learned of my dad's remarkable encounter with a UFO is that this is around 97, I'm thinking, I don't remember any precise dates. I had learned about Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso, who had authored the book with a ghostwriter's help the day after Roswell. And I'd had a long time interest in UFOs, wondering if they were legitimate or not, or just people's fantasies or misidentification of Venus, swamp gas, you know what I'm talking about. And so I'd heard him being interviewed on Art Bell's Coast to Coast a couple times. And that's where I first learned about you and Stephen Greer too. I've been a fan of Stephen Greer's for many, many years. In any event, I bought the book as soon as it was available. I read it. I was very impressed. And then more on a whim than anything else, because unfortunately my dad and I weren't that close. I had a real different personality, and wasn't that close to my mom either. But in any event, on a whim, I took the book with me one day when I went to visit my folks and offered it to my dad, told him what it was about. And hey, if you have any interest in this, you're welcome to read it. And Paula, my assumption was that he wouldn't. he might not even read the dust cover because it came from his younger son. In any event, about a month later, as I remember, I stopped by again at my folks, and there was my dad sitting in the open garage reading a spy novel as he usually did, having a martini. And I said, well, hey, Pop, how's it going? And blah, blah, blah. That book I gave you, did you take a look at it? And yeah, I did. Really? He actually read it. And so from that point, I don't even remember, I said, well, what did you think of it? Blah, blah, blah. And then out of that kind of muddled conversation, I can't remember, came a story that got engraved in my memory. And this is it. So my dad began to explain what happened in September 1950, flying that old Air Force plane. So let's get back. We're over the Hanford site now. He's at about 15,000 feet and just cruising along, just checking it out as a pilot like he would do. And something caught his attention, and it was above him. He looks up and he sees a silvery disc come in over the forbidden airspace of the Hanford site, pause, and then began doing impossible aeronautical maneuvers. Right angle turns, flitting back and forth at different angles, kind of like a, you know, crazy housefly almost. And he's just amazed at what he's seeing. And he estimated at 80,000 feet, which I've heard some Navy pilots speak of the same altitude where they've seen UFOs. So I don't know what the commonality is there, except coincidental, 80,000 feet was my dad's estimate. Well, here's the fun part, Paula. Air Force plane, my dad had the radio turned on. And so he was eavesdropping to the radio tower operator at the Moses Lake. Well, it's called Larson Air Force Base eventually. The radio tower operator talking to two US Air Force pilots who had been scrambled in top of the line F-86 Sabre jets to pursue that object where it shouldn't be over the Hanford site, because the main mission of that Air Force base was to protect the secret Hanford nuclear site back in the day. And
we're talking 1950s always, right?
Pardon me?
We're talking 1950s?
Yes. Yes. Well, that Air Force base, when it was still with the Army, I think it was built maybe in 48. But again, it had two missions. One was to protect Hanford, and the second one was to protect the enormous Grand Coulee Dam farther upstream on the Columbia River. And I lived on the Columbia River, not literally, you know, on the land near the Columbia River. So I, as a teenager, I loved it. We used to play dock tags and swim to islands, and it was just an amazing river, massive. So, so my dad heard this conversation begin between the radio guy in Moses Lake and the two pilots, and they were scrambled because this object had been seen on the radar there at the Air Force base. And so he listened in as these pilots were describing exactly what he was seeing, but of course from a different perspective and probably a different altitude. And it, you know, was matching exactly what he was seeing, the maneuvers of this object, this disc. And so it went on, he estimated this whole event for roughly 20 minutes. But he knew that even though these were like a, you know, state-of-the-art, top-of-the-line fighter jets, there's no way they could get close to that disc because their capacity altitude was, well, I've read maybe 50,000 feet, but he said more like 40,000 feet in practical terms. So he understood that this was kind of pointless for the fighters to try to pursue this disc. But then eventually towards the end of this brief encounter, that disc just immediately shot off at an upward shallow angle and was out of sight within seconds. That's how fast it was. So that in itself is remarkable, but there's more to the story. One minor aspect of the story is that Hanford site guards on the ground, some of them who were outside, they also saw the disc, and they documented their sightings in their daily reports. I know a guy who's a historian there at Hanford. I'm going to see if there's any way he might be able to, that'd be great, to get the actual date that it happened.
The actual date would really help. The actual date, and I don't know if you could use a FOIA request or whatever, but I've been doing some research and realized that some UFO events are recorded in the Atomic Energy Commission file and not the Air Force.
I know you said something to that effect, yeah.
And the ones we can't find in the Air Force files, I don't know if we have access to looking at the Atomic Energy Commission files with the FOIA request, you know, form of information. So if you can get this, you'd help me on another case.
I sure will, because I gave a bunch of my dad's stuff and my godfather's stuff. He was the head of AEC security for majority of his career, my godfather, and my dad's best friend. But there's more to this story. My dad gets back to the Richland airport, goes up to the tower, tells what he just saw and heard to the AEC radio operator there. Call your counterpart at the Air Force Base in Moses Lake, tell him what I just told you, and then I'm more than happy to add my account to their report. And my dad was just, you know, naively thinking, you know, this is a good thing to do. Well, the guy did what my dad said to do. The call ended. Well, what were you told? Here it comes, Paola, the fun part. The guy said, I don't know what you're talking about. We didn't see anything on radar. We didn't scramble any jets. Tell your pilot that he's mistaken, and you know, and whatever was popular in the day in the 50s, you know, have a nice day, click. So my dad not only had an amazing encounter with a classic UFO disc, but then he also had a comparably amazing encounter with the military cover-up that was already in progress, quite obviously, since at least 1947, if not sooner. So there you have it. If it hadn't been for Philip Corso's book and the whim to share it, that story would have gone into my dad's grave. And
what did he tell you on a personal level? What did he say?
That I can't remember, you know, because again, my dad and I, we weren't that tight. It's just the story itself that just stuck with me, almost verbatim, as close as my mind can function that way. But I've told this story a couple dozen times to friends and an occasional stranger when the opportunity seems to arise. And I check myself as I tell it, and I don't exaggerate a thing.
No, I believe it. What we need is a date, which is obvious.
Yeah.
And I had asked you on the phone because the story I'm working on, and you'll find out about it in about 4 months, has a witness to a UFO event who used to work with the governor of Washington State, Dixie Lee.
Who my dad was friends with. He knew her very well.
And Dixie Lee let this particular witness see his case, and it was in the Atomic Energy Commission files. And you said your dad flew Dixie Lee around?
Right. When she was the director of the AEC.
And what's ADC, Atomic?
Oh, AEC, Atomic Energy Commission.
Yeah,
Which is now the U.S. Department of Energy. That's what it's evolved to over the decades.
ADC, okay.
No, AEC.
AEC.
Atomic Energy Commission.
And Dixie Lee, what was her connection with that?
She, at one point, I didn't look up the years, but she was the head of the AEC. She was the director.
Of the Atomic Energy Commission, right?
Yeah, and then eventually became governor of Washington State.
Exactly. Okay, that's so important to my story.
Yeah.
And do you remember when your father might have been flying her around with her poodle?
Yeah, Jacques, her poodle. I just, because it stuck in my memory, but I didn't log it in any way I just remember my dad mentioning her more than once, and that they were good friends because of the flying, and she enjoyed his company on these flights, and that he was fine with her bringing her dog along, her poodle.
Jacques.
Jacques, yeah, that's what I remember. I think I'm correct on that.
Yeah, no, you couldn't make that up if you tried.
Yeah. Well, probably with Dixie Lee, it's a French poodle. It was a smaller version. And so Jacques would be a fitting name for a French poodle.
Okay, well, that is very interesting detail that I'll tell you about in a couple of months. But the case was that my witness, who worked for Dixie Lee, I helped get her elected, was shown his UFO encounter case. And it was shown by Dixie Lee, and I didn't realize she was the head of the Atomic Energy Commission.
Right. I should have looked it up beforehand to know when she started in that role, but that was the name I remember when I was a kid running the AEC, because my dad worked for the AEC, my godfather too. So sorry, I didn't check that out.
Dixie Lee.
Dixie Lee Ray, yeah.
Dixie Lee Ray, yes. So what you're doing without even realizing it, Donald, is, and in a couple of months you'll know why, you are filling in a dot in a case I'm working
on. Okay, well, that's
and
cool to hear.
I'm in shock because I'm in shock, Donald. You're going to find out why, but you came out of the blue to fill in a space on a case I'm working on that did have Dixie Lee Ray involved. And the fact that your father had a UFO encounter, I am positive he shared that with Dixie Lee Ray. I'm positive because she knew about this other case.
Okay.
So definitely. And I didn't, and the reason why I think this other case took place in 1945. So there was Army Air Force and there was no place to deposit stuff. So, and it took place, it had to do with nuclear. And the only place you could deposit a case, if there's no Air Force and Army files, is the Atomic Energy Commission files.
I see.
So it's in there. So God knows what other UFO stories are in there. All right. And that connects the dot for me. And so a final thing I want to ask you, but this is just opinion. We have a lot of UFOs flying over places like Maelstrom Air Force Base and South Dakota and so forth. Do you think that disc was on vacation?
No opinion there because I haven't a clue, but I'm very familiar with Maelstrom and that event. And
what's it doing there? What's it doing over Washington State, over Hanford? What is it doing there?
Well, the general view that I've devised over the years, listening to many people talking about, and I can't remember the gentleman, this is over 500-page book on UFO sightings over U.S. nuclear and military sites. You probably know him.
Hastings, Robert Hastings.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, I had thought on and off to maybe try to reach him to share the same story.
Absolutely. Yes, of course.
But as I kind of told you the other day, it's just, you know, you probably have so many more amazing accounts you know about.
I mean, illogically, using your logic, if it's flying over a nuclear, you know, Hanford is where what was going on.
Well, my view is, and it's subject to editing as I learn more, is that I do believe, not 100%, you know, I'm always flexible in what I accept as true, as close to being true. But I've accepted that we are being monitored, have been for who knows how many centuries, by advanced alien species who I also have come to accept are peaceful because they have evolved socially beyond our barbaric societies.
Okay. We go back to the location. Hanford was handling the plutonium.
Yes, plutonium for our nuclear weapons.
Yes, you got it. And the atomic bomb.
Yeah, so.
Yes. So it's not on vacation. I mean, we're going to go back there. I mean, there's some interest. There is some interest of the UFO. And I'll go back to what you said. If they were hostile, they would have destroyed Hanford.
Well, they would have taken over the planet centuries ago. If they were after minerals and who knows what other resources, or us as cattle,
yeah,
because they want to dine on us.
Go to these ridiculous situations.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of interviews about a lot over the UFOs over certain installations, especially nuclear. And in those days, I think Hanford was handling the plutonium. There's another place in Tennessee.
Right. Oak Ridge.
Yeah, Oak Ridge.
Right.
Those are the two places.
Hanford is the big sibling compared to Oak Ridge.
It was a big sibling, and you heard about that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it was just known, right?
Well, about nuclear sites or?
Nuclear, yeah, that Hanford was the big sibling of Oak Ridge.
Yeah, of all of the AEC and DOE nuclear sites, Hanford is the biggest. And that's where I had my career too, by the way.
Okay. So, what did you do there?
I retired as a senior environmental scientist. I ran the site-wide radioactive emissions monitoring program, did all the annual reporting, blah, 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 all of that stuff.
So how do you get interested in UFOs then?
As a kid, I fell in love with science fiction. Isaac Asimov, as an example. And then along came the first Star Trek TV series. I don't know, it was just something innate within me that Hollywood and authors somehow tapped into. And because I used to think a lot as a young kid about what in the world is this? What is out there? Where did it all come from? On and on and on. So I've always had that kind of insatiable curiosity about existence in general. And then you guys, you and Dr. Greer, you talk a lot about consciousness, and that's another topic that I've explored in considerable depth.
Okay, I'm trying to link your father's sighting before you were born or after you were born?
After I was born. Like I said, soiling my diapers. I was 9 months old.
9 months old when that happened. Okay, so I think that in the families of some of these contactees, and your father was obviously 20 minutes of a UFO. It's not like it came and went.
Yeah.
It didn't come and go.
Yeah, it darted around just to entertain people maybe.
I know. I think that contact event of your father's kind of funneled down into your family. maybe on a consciousness level. And because I'm convinced, I mean, this is just me, that they're there just to get your attention.
That's a good point. That's a good point, because I think a lot of the sightings, I've thought about that. The purpose is to let us humans, this kind of backward species, be aware that we can get better if we just use our smarts and our heart.
And when you get your attention, what happens is you become aware, and that's consciousness. That's being conscious.
Yeah.
So anyway, I want to thank you, because I want to share this, but this is going to mean even more in about 3 to 4 months, because the story I'm working on is going to come out, and it fills in a gap. What you don't even realize what you said. It fills in a gap with a story that I'm already working on. So I thank you for reaching out to me, and I appreciate your testimony, because it is excellent witness testimony. Your father's a viable witness. He's a military man.
Yes.
And just keep following Dr. Greer, because he's amazing and is trying to bring through this consciousness aspect.
Which is tremendous. Yeah, I really highly respect it. And I feel really privileged that you wanted to have this little informal discussion, because as the timing was approaching to do the Zoom thing, my first ever, I was talking to my pop, you know, and just say, I hope that I honor you, and that you will be satisfied with what I share. And, you know, I won't find out for quite a while. Well, maybe not. I'm 70 years old. So.
I'm older than you. I'm 75.
Oh, well, you don't look that. So in any case, this is really an honor, an exceptional privilege to be able to share this incredible event of my dad's. My father provided the bedrock for my acceptance that UFOs are real.
Thank you, Donald. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, you're very, very welcome.
Okay. You can write anytime.
Okay. Thank you, Paola. Okay. Bye.
Take care.